Everybody, Corey Weathers again. It is Monday and noon my time in Kansas. And every Monday I am doing a Facebook Live to talk about another chapter of Sacred Spaces. Again, not so much so that I'm spreading the word about reading the book of Sacred Spaces, but just because it was another good time for me to read the book again myself and not just learn what I learned before, but see how I can learn some new things in the new season that I'm in now. There's always room for growth in marriage, and I wanted to figure out some ways to take my marriage to the next level, and it was just a really good time to read it again. So while we're waiting for a couple of people, I'm going to share this in the Life Giver group where we have other people that are committing to go through the book study together as a group. And so I am going to figure out a way here to share that with everybody. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to do the same thing. It would be awesome if you would share with other people. Today's topic is really all about deployment jitters. And if you've ever gone through a deployment before, what happens before the deployment is kind of crazy. And it causes a lot of chaos in the home and in the marriage. And so we're going to talk about that. So let me share this to the group. Life Giver is the group. So that is... There we go. Hopefully it's shared. Hopefully you guys can see it there. If somebody is in the group and can't see it, I would love for you guys to share it anyways. So we are talking all about the chapter of ripping the Band-Aid. Now, we affectionately called that chapter ripping the Band-Aid because most people in the military know that if you've ever gone through a deployment, there is this kind of leading up to a deployment that everybody has like a massive amount of emotions. Everybody's on edge. There's just kind of this ramping up that leads up to a deployment. And there comes this point where you just have to rip the Band-Aid. And those of you who've gone through deployment, tell me a little bit about your experience of ripping the Band-Aid. Now, I know there are some families that you spend hours and hours and hours together, and then you finally just say, you know, that's it, we got to rip the Band-Aid, and you go separate ways. Other families wait until the last minute where you go and hang out until the group has to leave, the manifesto has to leave, everybody in that manifesto has to leave. Everybody kind of has their own way of doing it. So basically what this chapter is about is, this was back a couple years ago. This has been 2015. I'm getting ready to go on this trip with the Secretary of Defense, and I'm getting this opportunity to see Afghanistan and Iraq and see troops that are deployed and see things that we as family members rarely get to see. And I was excited about it, and we talked last week about kind of that push and pull feeling that I had, that we all experience, especially as parents, and trying to navigate everything at home, but that our serving spouses feel that way too. Whether you're a first responder or a military service member, there's always that feeling of excitement of going and doing what you're called to do and wanting to do that thing, but also feeling equally called to being your best in your family and being awesome at home too. And I told you last week that Matt has often run across a lot of men especially, but serving spouses who have said that they don't feel like they can be 100% either place, that they just end up being mediocre everywhere. And we all, I think as moms, those wives out there, I know I'm stereotyping here just a little bit, but we all can understand that feeling. We talked about that last week. Let's see. Yes, Jessica, that you get to the point where you just want to start it and get it done. Drop them off and leave so you don't cry in front of everyone. I have been there. In fact, for our first deployment, we said goodbye from the house. And I remember sitting there. It was our first deployment. I remember sitting there for like an hour, and we had nothing to do. We had nothing to talk about. We had already planned to be fully intentional going into the deployment of how we were going to work on ourselves independently from each other. But we had kind of planned all of that, but we had not planned how to say goodbye, right? We just didn't know what to do other than like just sit there and stare at each other until ultimately Matt decided he just had to get out of there, right? Even if it was hours from him leaving, he just needed to leave. And we did have that rip the Band-Aid. So in this experience, I'm about to go on my trip with the Secretary of Defense, and I've been given this opportunity to see troops overseas, and I am at this point where I'm realizing if I'm going to be able to get everything out of this that I'm wanting to get out of it. In other words, if I'm going to go on this trip and kind of as an ambassador, be the military spouse that brings back information, then I've got to be fully on mission, fully ready to engage everything that I'm supposed to learn from this experience. And now we're at this point where we're getting ready to say goodbye, and it got delayed, which everybody knows what that's like. And so we're at this place where we're in the middle of a move. We are in the middle of a PCS when this happens, which was crazy to me. And it could not have been more perfectly timed. And I look back and know that that was part of God's plan in all of this, that it was going to be actually a complete role reversal, which not only taught me a lot, but it taught Matt a lot too. And so as we go throughout the book, you're going to see what Matt learned from being back at home, from my perspective, and what I learned by putting myself in his shoes going on this trip. So at this point, I am really stepping into his shoes, his boots, if you will, and I'm trying to embrace everything that I'm feeling and thinking and comparing that and talking with him about that. Of, did you feel this way? Did you ever wonder about this? Did you feel that push and pull? So we're having lots of conversations like this at the time. Now, I want to say that we were finishing his graduation, his captain's career course, and right after that graduation, after a lunch with his parents, we are then supposed to drive to Virginia, spend the night in Virginia. Then I was supposed to go on this trip, and then Matt would get our household goods. But of course, like the military does, even for the Secretary of Defense, it was delayed an extra day. And what that meant was Matt couldn't just take me up to DC, drop me off, and come home for household goods and say goodbye to me on the tarmac. Like, that would have been awesome, right? Of course, it would have to be that now I'm set to leave on the day that he's supposed to get household goods, which means he can't be there on the tarmac saying goodbye to me. He's got to drop me off 24 hours early because there's no way he can stick around with the kids. He's got to be back to receive our household goods. So this was a complete role reversal. And I felt so vulnerable being left in this hotel room by myself for 24 hours, setting my alarm to make sure I wasn't late. And next week, we're going to dive into that kind of me stepping into the press pool and what that was like. I've got a lot of like behind the scenes, fun little tidbits that I really want you to be a part of. So it is not too late for you to jump in on the book club. Pick up the book if you haven't already. Pick up a digital copy if you if you don't have a physical one and don't want to wait for it. And you guys can catch up. The chapters are short and easy. It's actually more difficult for everybody to wait each week as we go through each chapter. So a couple of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading this week's chapter, which is about ripping the Band-Aid. Number one, during that PCS, as short as it was, because we were just driving from South Carolina to Virginia, which could be done in a day. Number one, I was terrible at multitasking. There was so much pressure and excitement and nervousness and anxiety that was leading up to this trip that I had, this opportunity that I had, that I couldn't be also fully present with Matt and the boys and his graduation. And what life would have asked from me, honestly, was for me to be fully present with Matt on his day of graduation because it was such an important day for him. But yet I had this thing looming that was also exciting, and I couldn't focus on either, to the point that I gave him the worst gift that you could possibly ever give somebody. And it still hangs on our Christmas tree every year, and I hate it because it is a constant reminder of how I felt like I failed in that moment. Here I was getting my bags packed and trying to manage the kids, and his parents are coming in for the graduation, and I'm thinking about everybody else and trying to be everywhere at once, that I failed to be present for my husband on a very important day for him. Lisa says she loves this book, even as a retired spouse, because she's a veteran spouse that also runs Healing Household 6, which is an awesome organization. It helped me unpack resentment and also understand my husband's resentment for missing so many of our lives over the years. Thank you, Lisa, for that huge shout out. And you know, Lisa, we are going to get into unpacking all of that soon. There's me too. And I'm also recognizing it's a good time in my life to take a look at this again. It's been a few years, and I didn't realize some things have an ability to creep into our soul and our spirit in ways that if we don't keep a check on them, I just had a feeling that's probably a good time for me to relook at this again, especially as we have been PCSing a lot. We haven't been going through necessarily the tempo of deployments a lot, but as the PCSs have increased, I realized that I have to kind of evaluate this military lifestyle and the impact that it's had on our family in a same but different way. And so some of you guys out there may not have had the deployment experience and how it's impacted your marriage and your family to deal with, but it's also other aspects of the chaotic military lifestyle. which is why I knew that this was a perfect time for me to do this again. So at this point in the story, Matt drops me off in DC. We do spend a day together going to the museum. One of my favorite quotes, one of my favorite memories and moments in my marriage was the moment in the museum where I was nervous and anxious and trying to be present, but not able to be present. Which, by the way, is a good reminder that those of you who are spouses that have service members that are getting ready to deploy, and I would say even for first responder spouses, when you have a spouse that is doing something that they're very excited about, it could be a promotion, it could be a change in job, it could be what they're headed out to do that day, that having that level of excitement and being on mission is very difficult to be present at the same time. And you guys know, as spouses, as military spouses specifically, that there can be super exciting things happening in your life and in your world that you really wish that your spouse could be more engaged and more present and expressing more empathy and excited for you, instead of it all revolving around them and their time schedule. And we know what that's like. And for me to experience that moment of trying to navigate this big change that was about to happen in my life, and even though it was just 1 week away, you guys have to understand this was on that big giant white plane that says United States of America on it. It was a VIP plane with VIP people that I don't usually associate with, going to countries that not only have I never been to, but also countries that are supposed to be war zones. And I'm also feeling like a super big target right now because I'm on a VIP plane with the Secretary of Defense. And I'm thinking to myself, how many people would love to shoot down that plane? Because I'm driving myself mad and I'm getting anxious and worried about the whole thing. And that's why my brain was just starting to get so anxious and nervous. Because even though it was a week away, this felt like a very big event in my life that I had never done before and may never ever get to do again. And so I think we need to remember that our spouses sometimes have those experiences too. They're about to embark on something that we as spouses and family members may not get a chance to be a part of, but to them, they are entering into something big on the world stage. They're getting to go do something that they've been trained to do and that they're ready to accomplish and see what they're worth. Not that they're not worth, that they're worth something, that their job is their worth, but that their time and training has been worth it for them to now go and do this thing that they've worked so hard to become good at. And so it's okay for them to be excited about that. And that can cause them to be less than present with what's happening in our daily life now. And I know that that's hard, especially when you have something big that's happening in your world. And I, in this moment, got to experience that extreme guilt and shame, really, that I couldn't be as present and excited for my own husband and on his graduation day because I had something big happening. And feeling that weight made me realize just how much next time my husband has this big thing that's happening, this opportunity, how much I want to be excited for him and releasing him to that, and allowing him to just put his sights on the mission and go after that. And that it's okay if he's not able to be fully present for me. In the story, he was incredibly forgiving. I think he understood that. He was ahead of me on all that. I'm experiencing all of this for the first time, and he was getting to experience what it was like on his side to see me focused on both places at once. And his intention, his way of moving into this kind of experiment, if you will, was to release me and just let me be where I needed to be, that he knew I had a lot on my plate. He knew he needed to let me go, that I couldn't be two places at once. And that, to me, was a huge lesson on the next time I had the opportunity to do that for him. I was going to do the best that I could, because it was so, there was so much grace and there was so much forgiveness and there was so much patience that grace, forgiveness, and patience changed me to experience that. And I don't want you guys to ever forget that our intentionality, our ability to, instead of approaching our marriage with resentment and selfishness, and I just need you to have it my way, that when we have opportunities to extend patience and graciousness, mercy, and forgiveness, to go, I can understand that you're struggling with that right now, or I can understand that you can't be fully present with me right now, that releasing them you have incredible influence into their heart and into their soul. And him doing that for me changed me. And I realized just how powerful that kind of influence is into changing a person and in changing a marriage. Okay, so at this point, he drives me up to DC and we rip the Band-Aid. And I didn't get to tell you my favorite part. I go on these tangents. My favorite part, and what was a marriage changer for me, was when we were walking through the museum and he could tell that I was in two different places in my mind and I couldn't be in any one place, that he put his arms around me and he said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'm so nervous. I don't want to admit it, but I'm so nervous." And he says to me, "Okay, I'm going to let you be small for today, but tomorrow you have to be big again." And that was a huge moment in my life. Number one, that in his arms, that he gave me a place where I could be the insecure Corey that feels like I've got imposter syndrome. Do you know what I'm saying? That I could just be human and that I could be afraid and feel as small as I felt like I was in that moment, that I was about to walk into something that required something bigger of me than I felt like I had the capacity to offer. But I realized in that moment that my marriage, and specifically with him, is my safe place. That's what marriage is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a safe place where your spouse doesn't have to be Superman all the time, doesn't have to be a superhero, that it's okay that we get to be superheroes in each other's lives, but it's also a place where we just get to be human and get to be small, and that we can't stay there though. And that's what his message was to me, is that this is a safe place for you to be small, but tomorrow you've got to, we say in counseling all the time, especially in addictions, we say fake it till you make it, right? And that's a huge part of stepping into greatness, is sometimes saying, I don't know if I have the capacity to do this big thing, but I'm going to try to act like I can, because I've done all the hard work I know to do leading up to this point. And so I'm going to walk into this new risk, this new challenge, whether it's a deployment, a separation, whatever is new that's going on in your life, whatever the military or first responder world is asking of you that feels like this is too big. It's too big, and I don't know if I have the capacity to go through it on my own strength. Maybe for some of you, I'm thinking of Lisa and all the veterans and their spouses that she works with and that she supports, that some of you guys are walking into a diagnosis, that you're walking into the world of PTSD treatment and how that impacts your family, that some of these impacts onto our marriages and families can feel so overwhelming that we have moments that we just want to be small, right? That we just want to just kind of go into fetal position and say, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. And that's okay if we have those moments. And it's okay to rely on the support of family and friends, especially if your spouse can't be there for you in all of those moments, because I don't think our spouse is supposed to be there for all of those moments. There's supposed to be other supportive people that are around you in your community that help you on those days that you feel small. But that we can be small in those moments so that we can then have the courage and the resources to be big again when it's time to be big. So for him, that's what he did for me. He helped me realize that that's my safe place. But tomorrow, I got to fake it till I make it. It's time to just walk in the steps of believing that each step that I take, I'm going to trust that I can handle that next step, and that's just as important. So if you guys are willing to be vulnerable, I would love for those of you that are watching to maybe share how that resonates with you. What is that big thing? What is that big thing that's looming in your life right now that feels big and you want to feel really small, but it's something that you've got to take a big step in, and you may have to fake it till you make it, but it's a risk, but it's a good risk, right? Maybe it's walking into this book club challenge. Maybe it's reading this book and going, this is really, I can sense that this is really tough stuff that I've got to like dive in and really process what this looks like in my life, that this is a tough thing to make a commitment with these bracelets and go, I'm going to work on my marriage even though I'm tired of working on it, or even though I feel like I don't want to work on it anymore. It's his turn. It's her turn to work on it. I'm going to take a break. I always had this vision when I was writing this book, that I was writing it for a group of people that were in like a boxing ring and everybody had gone to their separate corners. And I'm not saying that marriage is a place that we should be fighting each other physically. It wasn't so much of that image as much as it was sometimes you got to get into the fight, meaning getting into the hard work and saying, this is going to hurt and it's hard. And I don't know if I have what it takes to make this marriage great, but I got to stay in the fight. I got to stay in the middle of it. And when I was writing the book, I kept thinking about everybody was in these separate corners, that they had just stopped trying, that military and first responder life gets us to this point where we're tired and we're weary and we don't even understand what's going on in each other's worlds anymore. And we've just retreated to our separate corners. And so whatever it is, Lisa says it's a deployment coming up. Perhaps for someone else, it's about walking into new treatment for how military or first responder world has impacted your marriage. Maybe it's approaching dealing with the issue of alcoholism, or maybe it's dealing with the issue of confronting trauma and how that's impacted your marriage. Maybe it's just reading the book. Maybe it's a deployment, maybe it's a separation, maybe it's engaging into the fact that you as a couple have drifted apart and now we got to figure out how to come back together, and that feels like a risk too. Either way, there comes a point where you have to rip the Band-Aid, where you have to say, I'm going to get out of my corner of the boxing ring and I'm going to step back into the fight, even though I'm tired, even though me stepping to the middle of the ring may look like me standing there by myself pursuing this marriage until my spouse decides to come out of the corner. Sometimes when your spouse is sitting in the corner, seeing you pursue the marriage is going to make him realize she's in the fight. He's in the fight. They've not stopped working on this, and I'm the one that's keeping us from moving forward. And that's all the momentum that they need to get back into the ring, is to realize that the marriage is only going to get better if both people are in the middle doing the hard work and making themselves vulnerable to the hurt and the risk that marriage actually is. Again, I'm not talking about domestic violence and those kind of risks, right? We're talking about healthy, vulnerable, engaging into the relationship, even when marriage has been hard and makes us want to hide. Sarah says, I'm so ready to get back to work, but our family stage and his schedule is making it difficult. She fears a little bit that she's too ready to get lost in the work, and that will be a huge wedge. Oh, Sarah, I know exactly what this is like. And that's a tough season to enter back into work. And I'll tell you that it can be messy, that my husband and I are always trying to navigate how to find that balance for the both of us. It is, all of us, your spouse, your serving spouse, and military spouses, and everybody in marriage. We all enjoy finding purpose and identity and finding that we have purpose outside of just raising kids or just cleaning the house or whatever. There is a feeling of accomplishment when we're volunteering or working or whatever outside of just those relationships. And so it's easy to feel like you can get lost in those other things because they bring you that sense of purpose. And so, Sarah, I think it is a great fear for you to have, that you could get lost in that because it feels so purposeful. And that begins this risk, this journey of how do I navigate and always be self-aware so that I don't get lost in that. Kara, being relatively new military spouse, navigating unfamiliar experiences while simultaneously being an FRG leader. Wow, Kara, you jumped into the deep end, and that's okay. There's plenty of support to help you get through that. But that is a huge example of some big things that require you faking it till you make it and asking for good help and resources to help you get through it, because that is a lot to go through, and you definitely don't want to do that by yourself. So you guys are kind of getting this. These are all risks and things that are something big is being asked of you, and you don't know if you have the capacity to do it. And so I just want you to know as I close up for today, because today is not going to be an hour long, but I just want to encourage you that for me, going back to that role reversal, I think, well, let me say for Matt first. I think as he walked away and dropped me off at the hotel room, he prayed over me, the boys and him prayed over my trip, prayed over the safety of all of it. As he walked away, I have a feeling he experienced the relief of ripping that Band-Aid that I know so many of us military spouses especially have experienced, of turning your attention, of saying goodbye. And it goes from saying goodbye to your serving spouse that's heading off for that deployment, and then turning your attention to, okay, now what do I do? I have a neighbor who in the next couple days is coming back from dropping her husband off, and he's getting ready to deploy. And I was over there watering her plants today, and I was thinking to myself, she is, I can picture her driving home from that and how she feels. It is a feeling of relief that the ripping of the Band-Aid is done, but it's also kind of this intimidating, like, wow, okay, now what do I do? And now the clock starts, right? And so I know that Matt got to experience that. Even though I was going to be gone for a week, that week was going to be really intense for him, receiving those household goods. And I know Matt well enough, he does it every time we move, is that he fully tries to set up the house in a week or less. By day 3, we even have pictures hung. And without me there, I knew he was going to have the temptation to work so hard that he was going to exhaust himself. And by the time I'd get back, he'd be in a deficit. But I had no control over whether he was going to do that or not. But I knew his mission was now facing forward and taking the boys and saying, all right, boys, it's just the 3 of us. And I know for a fact that day they hit IKEA and did some shopping on their way back to the house to receive those household goods. And he was on mission. For me, in that role reversal moment, what I realized was, honestly, I felt alone. I felt like as I saw the 3 of them walk down the sidewalk and walk to the car, I suddenly realized they were going to have a whole set of experiences without me. And that brings up emotion for me right now, because I was there in the hotel room by myself. And I was about to go in and do something exciting that I knew I was called to do. But there was also a part of me that was like, all right, if I'm going to make this count, I'm going to have to make this count by myself. And yes, there is an easier feeling of not having the kids to worry about during that time. I also saw my family leaving, and I had to sit in that for a moment and realize my family is going to go off and have this whole set of experiences without me, and that's okay. But at the same time, I hate that. And I felt for just a moment what I think that a lot of our serving spouses feel in that moment of ripping the Band-Aid, that we can both simultaneously shift our perspectives to the mission, knowing that feeling of ripping the Band-Aid, it is a ripping of a family that feels like you're being ripped apart. And so it is all about, are we willing to take these separate experiences that we're going to have in marriage, in service-related marriage, are we willing to make it count so that whatever we experience separately is something that we can come back together, not having fully walked through each of those experiences with the other person. Like it's going to be 2 separate things that we can't understand, but it better count. Like we better bring purpose out of it somehow, or it was worth nothing. We just spent some time apart and we lost that time and it wasn't even worth it. And so whatever season you guys are walking into, I'm encouraging you to make it count. Learn everything that you can from it. Everything is grist from the mill. Even when we make mistakes, we can go, you know what? I made a mistake and I'm going to figure out how to pick myself up, learn from it, and be better because of it, because I want it to be worth it. I don't want time just to be wasted. Okay. So my encouragement to you guys moving forward is to jump in on the book if you haven't jumped in on it already. Never stop practicing whatever empathy you can practice in your marriage. Don't compare the 2. Don't compare your ability to step into your spouse's shoes to their ability to step into your shoes. You be willing to get into the boxing ring and do the hard work. All of us have a different set of strengths and different set of abilities on what we bring to the marriage. There's a lot of our serving spouses that may not have as good of a skill, especially if they're men. Can I say that? Especially if they're men, may not necessarily have the same amount of empathy skills that you have, especially if you're a mom at home, if you're a woman at home. I'm definitely talking in stereotypes here, but it kind of tends to be true that you are multitasking all the time. You're taking care of the kids. You're thinking about everybody's feelings. You're thinking about your feelings, the neighbor's feelings, the kids' feelings, and you are practicing empathy all day long, 24/7, which is a whole other topic on whether or not that's healthy, okay? But there's a lot of serving spouses out there who are in this job, not because they're good at empathy, but because they're good at a whole other set of skills that's perfect for their job. And we have to remember that there is a transition, at least when they come home, when we're asking them to have empathy and put themselves in our shoes. And then that's a whole other discussion on whether or not they're skilled good at it or good at it, right? So that's another place for us to extend grace and forgiveness when that is different between the 2, and that we're not comparing the 2. But maybe instead we learn how to communicate to each other, where we can start asking the question of, what is this like for you? And describe to me about how important this is to you, and what is it that I don't understand so that I can understand it better. Questions always help us understand accurately what the other person is feeling rather than us just guessing and making a bunch of assumptions. Ask more questions, not to the point of nagging. Do you guys understand? I'm talking about the balance of that. But in return, if you are a female spouse specifically, and you feel like you have more empathy than maybe your spouse is built to have, then you can set them up for success by saying, hey, hon, I got a lot happening and I really want to just kind of tell you what it's like to be in my shoes so that maybe it helps you understand where I'm coming from. And by the way, here's also a couple things that you could do that would really help me because of the situation that I'm in. And of course, we're having that conversation without attacking them or attacking their character or saying, you never do such and such, right? We're saying, hey, you know, I've been with the little ones all day long. I haven't had a break. So when you get home, it would be so amazing if you, when you're ready to take the kids for about 30 minutes, I can just go for a walk and clear my mind and I'll come back a better person, which is great for both of us. So I hope that gives you kind of a little bit of a tip to help with that empathy and those conversations. So I think for today, the theme is ripping the Band-Aid is hard for everybody. It's hard for both sides. And hopefully the way that I talked about it today kind of shed some light into maybe what your spouse has experienced or will experience so that you can relate and kind of understand how to love him or her through that. But that also we can start having these conversations to increase empathy in our marriage. And that also whatever season you're approaching, whatever big thing that's requiring you to adult, and I mean adult really hard right now, that is what adulting is. And we've got to find some ways to be small in the right places. And maybe we take that to our spouse and allow ourselves to be small with our spouse and let them be that person that holds us and supports us so that we can then be big again. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. Hopefully this was encouraging for you today. Join me next week when we talk about the departure. And I have some fun stories to add to what's in the book that didn't make it into the book that I hope to share with you. Join the Life Giver group for deeper dives where I take some of the questions from the discussion guide that you would experience in a small group going through this book, that we put them in the Life Giver group where you can discuss that with other people who are wanting to dive a little bit deeper. So I hope you guys are having a great start to your week. Thanks for joining me every week. I appreciate you guys jumping in and commenting and asking good questions. It's so much fun. Next week, I'll be prepared with a few more questions that you guys can. I didn't ask you a whole lot of questions today, but I appreciate all the feedback. And I will see you guys next week and we'll talk a little bit more. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.